The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when the human delegation walked in. Ambassador Sarah Chen led her small team of 3 through the massive doors, their footsteps echoing against the polished stone floor. Around them, representatives from over 200 species watched with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. The Vorthan High Commander stood at the center podium, his 4 arms crossed in anger. Across from him, the Kesari Prime Minister floated in her atmospheric bubble, her tentacles writhing with equal fury. These 2 races had been at war for 60 standard years. Millions had died. Entire planets had been reduced to ash. Council Speaker Threx, an ancient being made of living crystal, addressed the chamber. We have called this emergency session because the Terran Federation has requested to mediate the Vorthan Kesari conflict. Many of you have expressed concerns about this proposal. The humans have been part of our galactic community for only 30 years. They have no military might to enforce peace. They have no great wealth to buy compliance. Yet they insist they can help. A wave of clicking and buzzing filled the chamber as delegates discussed among themselves. The Vorthan High Commander spoke first. This is an insult. We do not need these soft-skinned creatures telling us how to conduct our affairs. The Kesari attacked our colonies. We demand justice through strength. The Kesari Prime Minister's voice came through her translation device, cold and sharp. The Vorthan destroyed our breeding worlds first. They started this war. They will pay with their extinction. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. She was not tall by human standards, and compared to most species in the room, she looked almost fragile. Her dark hair was tied back simply, and she wore no fancy robes or symbols of power, just a plain gray suit. "If I may speak," she said calmly. Speaker Threx nodded. "You may." "Thank you." Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. "I know what you all think of us. We're young. We're weak. We don't have warships that can crack planets or shields that can stop antimatter bombs. You're right about all of that." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. Most diplomats would begin by praising their own species. This human was admitting weakness openly. "But we have something else," Sarah continued. "We have experience with war, not the kind of war you fight out here between stars. We had wars on our home planet for thousands of years. Wars over land, over resources, over ideas, over things so small that looking back, we cannot understand why we fought at all. We killed each other by the millions. We burned our own cities. We poisoned our own air and water." The chamber grew quiet. This was not the speech they expected. "And somehow we learned to stop. Not because we became stronger or weaker, not because one side won forever. We stopped because we finally learned to understand each other, really understand. Not just translate words, but feel what the other side felt, see the world through their eyes." High Commander Vex made a sound of disgust. "Feelings do not stop weapons. Understanding does not bring back the dead." "No," Sarah agreed. "Nothing brings back the dead. I'm sorry for all you have lost. I truly am." She paused, and something in her voice made the Vorthan leader look at her more carefully. "High Commander, may I ask you something personal?" The Vorthan stiffened. "This is a diplomatic session, not a personal conversation." "I know, but diplomacy is personal. Every decision about war and peace is made by individuals who have their own fears and hopes and memories. So please, if you're willing, why did you become a soldier?" The question seemed to catch Vex off guard. He was silent for a long moment. The chamber waited. "My father was a farmer," he finally said. "When I was young, the Kesari raided our colony. They killed him in our fields while he was trying to protect our crops. I watched from the storage bunker where he had hidden me." His voice grew harder. "I became a soldier so no other child would have to watch their father die." Sarah nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing that. I'm deeply sorry about your father." She turned to the Kesari Prime Minister. "Prime Minister Shao, may I ask you the same question? How did you come to lead your people in this war?" The Kesari's tentacles moved in patterns that suggested surprise. You wish to know my personal history. Only if you're willing to share it. Prime Minister Shao was quiet for several seconds. I was a scientist before the war. I studied the deep oceans of our homeworld. I never wanted power or politics, but the Vorthan attacked our primary breeding ground. My spawn sister and all her children were killed. Over 10,000 young Kesari, not yet old enough to leave the nursery pools. I entered politics because someone had to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Sarah felt the weight of both stories pressing on her heart. She had read the histories, studied the casualty reports, memorized the timeline of attacks and counterattacks. But these were not statistics. These were real beings carrying real pain. High Commander Vex, she said gently, you became a warrior to protect children from losing their fathers. Prime Minister Shao, you became a leader to speak for children who died too young. You both started this journey for the same reason, to protect the innocent, to honor those you lost. Both leaders stared at her, then at each other. The humans have a saying, Sarah continued. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Every attack creates new orphans who grow up wanting revenge. Every retaliation kills someone's spawn sister, someone's father, someone's child. The cycle never ends on its own. Someone has to choose to break it. High Commander Vex's voice was rough. You make it sound simple. It is not simple. No, Sarah agreed. It's the hardest thing anyone can do. It takes more courage than fighting ever could, because fighting is easy. You have an enemy you attack. You don't have to think about who they really are. But peace means looking at the being who killed your family and seeing them as a person. It means accepting that they also suffered. It means choosing to stop the pain instead of passing it on. The chamber remained silent. No one had ever spoken to these two powers this way. Sarah gestured to her team. A young man named James stepped forward carrying a small device. We're not asking you to trust each other. Not yet. We're asking you to understand each other. We've developed a program, something we've used to end conflicts on Earth and in our own colonies. We call it the exchange. What is this exchange? Speaker Threx asked. A series of meetings, Sarah explained. Not between military leaders or politicians, between ordinary citizens. Farmers and scientists, teachers and merchants, parents and children. Small groups who spend time together, share meals, tell their stories. No negotiations, no demands, just people getting to know each other. Prime Minister Shao's tentacles moved skeptically. You think simple conversations can end 60 years of war? Not quickly, Sarah admitted. Not easily, but yes, because war is not fought by statistics or strategies. War is fought by individuals who believe the enemy is evil, or alien, or less than real. When you sit across from someone and hear their story, when you share a meal and learn their children's names, it becomes much harder to see them as a target. They become a person. High Commander Vex shook his head. My soldiers will never agree to sit and chat with Kesari murderers. Some won't, Sarah acknowledged, but some will, and those few will tell others what they learned. Slowly, the story changes. The enemy becomes the neighbor. The monster becomes the mother who lost her children. It takes time, but it works. It's the only thing that has ever worked in all our long, bloody history. The Vorthan leader turned away, his posture rigid, but he did not leave. Why do you care? Prime Minister Shao asked suddenly. This is not your war. You have nothing to gain from peace between us. Sarah smiled sadly. Because we've been where you are, we've felt what you feel, and we know how it ends if no one stops it. We nearly destroyed ourselves. We lost so much that can never be recovered. If we can help someone else avoid that fate, then maybe all our suffering meant something. Maybe we learned something worth sharing. Speaker Threx leaned forward. The Council will take a short recess. High Commander, Prime Minister, I suggest you consider the Terran proposal carefully. This may be your last chance for peace. As the chamber began to empty, Sarah noticed that neither the Vorthan nor the Kesari leader left immediately. They stood at their respective podiums, not looking at each other, but not leaving either. It was a small thing, but Sarah had learned that small things were how peace began. 3 months later, the first exchange meeting took place on a neutral station in the dead space between Vorthan and Kesari territory. Sarah had spent every day since the council session preparing for this moment. She had barely slept, barely eaten, barely thought about anything else. The station was called Midpoint, and the humans had designed every detail with care. The meeting room was circular, with no head of the table, no position of power. The lighting was calibrated to be comfortable for both species. The temperature was a compromise that neither found ideal but both could tolerate. Even the chairs had been specially made to accommodate Vorthan bodies and Kesari atmospheric bubbles. 12 participants had been chosen for the first exchange. 6 Vorthan, 6 Kesari. None were soldiers or politicians. Sarah had specifically requested ordinary citizens who had lost something in the war but who had also expressed, however quietly, some doubt about continuing the conflict. The Vorthan delegation arrived first. They moved carefully, their forearms held close to their bodies in a defensive posture. Sarah greeted each one personally, learning their names, asking about their journey. There was Kel, a metal worker whose factory had been destroyed. There was Mara, a teacher who had lost half her students in a bombing. There was Drex, an old farmer who reminded Sarah painfully of High Commander Vex's story about his father. When the Kesari arrived in their mobile bubbles, the Vorthan visibly tensed. Sarah watched as ancient hatred flickered across their faces, but they did not attack. They did not even speak harshly. They simply watched and waited. Sarah stepped into the center of the room. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is difficult. I know you have every reason to hate the people across from you. I'm not asking you to forgive anyone. I'm not asking you to forget what you've lost. I'm only asking you to listen, to speak, to share a meal. That's all." A young Kesari named Bryn spoke through her translator. "What is the point of this? Words will not bring back the dead." "No," Sarah agreed. "But words might keep more people from joining them. Words might help the living find a way forward." She paused. "Bryn, why did you agree to come here?" The Kesari was silent for a moment. "My daughter. She is young, only 10 cycles old. She asked me once why we were fighting. I could not answer her. I realized I did not truly know anymore. The war has simply always been there, like the stars in the sky. I came because I want to find an answer for her." Sarah turned to the Vorthan side. "Kel, why did you agree to come?" The metal worker's voice was gruff. "Because I am tired of rebuilding what gets destroyed, tired of watching young people march off to die, tired of hatting." He looked down at his 4 hands. "I used to make art before the war, beautiful things from metal and stone. I cannot remember the last time I made something beautiful, only weapons, only tools of death." "Those are good reasons," Sarah said. "Real reasons. Human reasons, even though none of you are human. That's what I want you to discover today. How much you have in common. How many of your feelings and fears and hopes are shared across species lines." The meal was served. Simple food, nothing fancy, prepared to be safe for both species. Sarah had insisted on sharing food because humans had learned long ago that eating together was one of the most powerful ways to build connection. There was something fundamental about breaking bread with someone, something that bypassed political barriers and spoke directly to the heart. At first, no one spoke. The Vorthan ate mechanically, eyes down. The Kesari consumed their nutrient gel in their bubbles, tentacles still. The silence was thick enough to cut. Then Drex, the old farmer, cleared his throat. "This grain," he said slowly, "it reminds me of something we grew on my homeworld before the war." He looked at the Kesari across from him, a older being named Shem. "Do your people farm?" Shem's tentacles rippled with something like surprise. "We cultivate the deep waters, kelp forests primarily, though the war has destroyed most of our farms." "Kelp?" Drex seemed genuinely curious. "What is that?" As Shem began to explain underwater agriculture, Sarah felt something shift in the room. The tension did not disappear, but it eased slightly. Two old beings who had spent their lives growing food were finding common ground in the simple act of discussing their work. This was how it started, not with grand speeches or political agreements, with two farmers talking about crops. Over the next several hours, more conversations emerged. Mara the teacher discovered that the Kesari had similar struggles with educating young people during wartime. Kel learned that the Kesari also valued art and craftsmanship, though their medium was water sculpting rather than metalwork. Bryn shared stories about her daughter, and a Vorthan named Sira spoke about her own children with obvious love. By the end of the session, no one had become friends. No one had forgiven the enemy, but something small had changed. The Kesari were no longer just monsters who killed indiscriminately. They were farmers and teachers and parents who happened to look different. The Vorthan were no longer just brutal warriors. They were artists and workers and people who were tired of fighting. As the delegations prepared to leave, Drex approached Shem. "Your kelp forests," he said awkwardly. "I would like to see them someday, when this is over." Shem's tentacles moved in what might have been a smile. "And I would like to see your grain fields. Perhaps we could learn from each other." Sarah watched this exchange with tears in her eyes that she quickly blinked away. It was such a small moment, such a tiny seed of connection, but seeds were how forests grew. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, she thought, and today they had taken that step. Word of the first exchange meeting spread through both the Vorthan Empire and the Kesari Collective. The reactions were mixed, often violent. Protests erupted on several Vorthan worlds, with crowds demanding that their representatives be punished for consorting with the enemy. On the Kesari homeworld, extremist groups called for the execution of all exchange participants. High Commander Vex contacted Sarah through a secure channel. His image flickered on her screen, his face grim. "Ambassador Chen, I am under enormous pressure to end this experiment. My generals say it makes us look weak. My people call me a traitor." Sarah nodded. "I expected this. Change is always resisted, especially by those who profit from the status quo. How can we continue if our own people turn against us?" "The same way change has always happened, High Commander, one person at a time. The 12 people who attended the first exchange meeting are now telling their stories. Their families are listening. Their neighbors are wondering. Some will reject what they hear, but some will be curious. And curiosity is the enemy of hatred." Vex was silent for a long moment. "You really believe this can work?" "I do, because I've seen it work. On Earth, we had conflicts that lasted longer than your war with the Kesari, religious wars that spanned centuries, ethnic hatreds that passed from generation to generation, and slowly, painfully, we overcame them, not by defeating the enemy but by realizing that we were all just people, all suffering, all hopping for something better." The Vorthan leader looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "That farmer, Drex, he sent me a message. He told me about his conversation with the Kesari called Shem. He said—" Vex paused. "He said it was the first time in 40 years he had felt hope." Sarah felt her heart lift. Hope is contagious, High Commander. Once it starts spreading, it's very hard to stop. But so is hatred. Yes, that's why we have to be careful. That's why we have to protect the people who are willing to take risks for peace. They are the bridge builders, and there will always be those who want to burn bridges. Vex made a decision visible in the set of his shoulders. "I will continue to support the exchange, whatever the cost to my career or my reputation. My father would have wanted peace. He was killed because of this war, but he never wanted it. He just wanted to farm his land and raise his son." "Then honor his memory by ending the cycle," Sarah said gently. "Be the leader who breaks the chain of revenge." On the Kesari side, Prime Minister Shao faced similar challenges. Her political opponents accused her of weakness, of betraying those who had died. But she too found unexpected support. The scientist community, which she had once been part of, began speaking out in favor of continued negotiations. Ordinary citizens who had lost children and siblings started to question whether revenge was worth losing even more. The second exchange meeting was larger than the first, 20 participants on each side, including some who had initially been hostile to the idea. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to create an environment where difficult conversations could happen safely. This time, there were moments of real conflict. A Vorthan whose son had died in battle confronted a Kesari military veteran directly, demanding to know why his child had been killed. The tension in the room was explosive. But instead of deflecting or defending, the Kesari veteran spoke honestly. I was following orders. I believed I was protecting my people. I did not think about the individuals I was killing. They were just targets. He paused, his tentacles moving slowly. I have nightmares about what I did. I wake up seeing faces. I did not know they were faces until now. I thought your people were without feeling. The Vorthan father stared at him. You have nightmares. Every night for 30 years. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Two beings who had been touched by the same tragedy, standing on opposite sides of a line that suddenly seemed very thin. Sarah stepped in carefully. Both of you have suffered. Both of you have caused suffering. That is the nature of war. It creates wounds that go both ways. The question is whether you want to keep wounding each other or whether you want to start healing together. The Vorthan father sat down heavily. I want my son back. I cannot have that. So what do I want instead? What would your son have wanted? Sarah asked. The question hung in the air. Finally, the father spoke, his voice cracking. He was a gentle boy. He loved music. He only joined the military because he thought it was his duty. He would have wanted peace. He always wanted peace. Then live for what he wanted. Honor his memory by building the world he would have wanted to live in. The father looked at the Kesari veteran. What was your name? Geth. I am Vanner. He reached out one of his 4 hands. I do not forgive you, Keth. I am not sure I ever can, but I will try to understand you. Keth extended a tentacle, and for the first time in 60 years, a Vorthan and a Kesari touched in something other than violence. The news of this moment spread even faster than the first meeting. Recordings of Vanner and Keth's exchange were shared across both civilizations. Some called it propaganda, others called it betrayal, but many simply called it human. Which was strange, since neither of them was human at all. James, Sarah's assistant, commented on this one evening as they reviewed their progress. They're using human as a term for compassion, for understanding. That's never happened before in galactic history. Sarah smiled tiredly. It's what we have to offer, not ships or weapons or technology, just the hard-won knowledge that people can change, that enemies can become friends, that cycles of violence can be broken. Do you think it's enough? Sarah looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, 2 vast civilizations were poised between continued destruction and possible peace. The balance was delicate, fragile, easily tipped either way. I don't know, she admitted, but it's all we have, so we have to make it enough. The breakthrough came 6 months later, from an unexpected source. A young Vorthan girl named Sari had been corresponding with a Kesari child named Mull through a carefully monitored exchange program. They had never met in person, only communicated through messages and simple games. Sari was 8 standard years old. Mull was 7. When their exchange was discovered by a Vorthan extremist group, Sari's family became a target. A bomb was planted at their home. It detonated in the middle of the night, killing Sari's mother and leaving Sari badly injured. The attack should have ended the peace process. It should have proved that understanding was impossible, that hatred was too deeply rooted to overcome. Many on both sides expected the exchange program to be shut down immediately. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Mull, the Kesari child, sent a message to the Vorthan media. It was simple, written in a child's vocabulary, transmitted through official diplomatic channels that had never been used for anything like this before. My name is Mull. Sari is my friend. Someone hurt her family because of me. I am very sorry. I did not know that being friends was dangerous. I thought being friends was good. In my school, they teach us that Vorthan are bad, but Sari is not bad. She likes to draw pictures and she wants to be a doctor when she grows up. She told me funny stories about her pet creature. How can someone who loves their pet be bad? I do not understand. Why do people want to hurt her? We were just talking. We were just being friends. The message spread across the Vorthan Empire within hours. Adults who had hardened their hearts against the Kesari found themselves moved by a child's simple confusion. Sari's father, recovering from his own injuries, made a public statement. My wife is dead. My daughter may never fully heal. I have every reason to hate the Kesari, but I look at the messages my daughter shared with this child Mull, and I see two little ones who only wanted friendship. They did not understand the war. They did not care about politics or history or revenge. They just saw another child and thought, maybe we can be friends. If a Vorthan child and a Kesari child can see past all our hatred, why can't we? High Commander Vex made a bold decision. He went on public broadcast and spoke directly to his people. 60 years ago, I watched my father die. I became a soldier to protect children from that fate. Today, a child was nearly killed because she dared to befriend someone from the other side. We have become the very thing I swore to fight against. We have become the ones who make children suffer. This is not who we are. This is not who I want us to be. On the Kesari side, Prime Minister Shao brought young Mull to address her parliament. The child floated in her small atmospheric bubble, clearly nervous, surrounded by beings many times her size. I wrote to Sari today, Mull said quietly. I asked if she was okay. She said her mom is gone and she is very sad. She asked if I could send her more stories because stories make her feel better. I told her I would send her all the stories I know. The child paused. Why are the grown-ups so angry about us being friends? We never hurt anyone. Several parliamentary members were visibly affected. One elder Kesari spoke up. Child, do you know what the Vorthan have done to our people? Mull's tentacles moved uncertainly. They killed people in the war. We killed people too. That is what war is. But Sari did not kill anyone. She is just a child like me. Why should we keep being angry at each other for things we did not do? The simplicity of the question cut through decades of political rhetoric. Why should the children pay for the crimes of their ancestors? How long would the cycle continue if each generation taught the next to hate? Sarah watched these developments from the midpoint station. Her team gathered around her. They had not planned this. They could not have predicted that two children exchanging messages would become the symbol of a possible peace, but they had created the conditions for it to happen. What do we do now? James asked. We support this moment, Sarah said. We help it grow. Public opinion is shifting on both sides. People are seeing each other as real individuals for the first time. We need to keep building those connections, keep creating opportunities for understanding. She contacted both governments with a proposal, a joint medical mission to treat Sari. Vorthan and Kesari doctors working together to help a child wounded by extremists from both sides. The symbolic power would be immense. High Commander Vex agreed immediately. If our doctors can work together to save a child, perhaps our peoples can learn to work together on other things. Prime Minister Shao was more cautious but ultimately supportive. This will anger the hardliners on both sides, but I am tired of being controlled by those who only know how to hate. The medical mission was broadcast across both civilizations. Vorthan and Kesari medical professionals, species who had been killing each other for 60 years, stood side by side in an operating theater, carefully repairing the damage done to a little girl who had committed no crime except hopping for friendship. Sari survived. When she woke from surgery, the first thing she asked was whether Mull was okay. The doctors told her that Mull was watching through a video link, that she had been worried about her friend and wanted to see her get better. Sari smiled weakly. Tell her not to worry. Tell her I want to hear those stories, she promised. A Kesari surgeon, who had spent 3 hours working to save a Vorthan child, felt something shift inside himself. This was not the enemy. This was just a little girl who wanted to hear stories from her friend. I will tell her, he said. I promise. The war did not end that day. Peace treaties were not signed, armies were not disbanded, decades of distrust were not erased. But something had changed in the collective consciousness of both species. The enemy had a face now. The enemy was a child who liked stories, a father who loved his daughter, a doctor who worked to save lives. Understanding was not the end of the conflict, but it was the beginning of the end. 5 years later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood on the surface of a planet that had once been a battlefield. Around her, Vorthan and Kesari civilians worked side by side, clearing debris, planting new vegetation, building homes for refugees from both sides. The Peace of Understanding, as it came to be called, had taken 3 more years of patient work to finalize. There had been setbacks, conflicts, moments when everything seemed ready to collapse back into war. But the connections built through the exchange program had grown too strong to break. Too many people on both sides had looked into the eyes of the former enemy and seen themselves reflected back. High Commander Vex had stepped down from military leadership to become the first Vorthan ambassador to the Kesari Collective. He spent his days working with former enemies, building the peace he had once thought impossible. Prime Minister Shal had retired from politics, but remained active in education initiatives, working to ensure that the next generation of Kesari children would grow up knowing Vorthan as neighbors rather than monsters. Sari had healed fully and was now a teenager studying medicine at a joint Vorthan-Kesari academy, one of dozens that had been established as part of the peace agreement. Her friend Mull was there too, studying marine biology. They saw each other every day, 2 young people whose childhood friendship had helped spark a revolution in understanding. Sarah watched them working together in a lab, their easy companionship a testament to what was possible when people chose connection over conflict. You did this, James said, coming to stand beside her. Sarah shook her head. They did this, we just gave them the opportunity. Don't be humble. None of this would have happened without you, without the exchange program, without your belief that understanding was possible. Sarah thought about all the humans who had come before her, all the peacemakers and bridge builders who had struggled to end conflicts on Earth, the abolitionists who had fought against slavery, the civil rights leaders who had demanded equality, the diplomats who had negotiated ceasefires between nations that had been enemies for centuries. She was part of a long tradition of people who believed that hatred was not inevitable, that enemies could become friends, that cycles of violence could be broken. We carry a hard-won knowledge, she said. We learned it through rivers of blood and mountains of corpses. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning it, but we learned. And now we share that knowledge with others so they don't have to suffer as much as we did. The Galactic Council had taken notice. Other conflicts across the galaxy were now being approached with similar methods. Human diplomats were in demand everywhere, not for their military might or economic power, but for their understanding of how to turn enemies into allies. It was strange, Sarah reflected, that this was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not weapons or technology, but wisdom born from suffering. The knowledge that all sentient beings shared common hopes and fears, that everyone wanted to protect their families and build better lives, that beneath the surface differences of biology and culture, there was a fundamental similarity that could serve as the foundation for peace. Sari approached her, smiling broadly. Ambassador Chen, I wanted to thank you, again. Sarah smiled back. You've thanked me many times, Sari. It's not necessary. But it is. You gave us a chance, me and Mull and everyone else. You believed in us when most people thought we would fail. I believed in you because I've seen what people can do when they choose understanding over hatred. You and Maul proved that even in the midst of war, connection is possible. You were the bridge, Sari. You and Maul. Two children who didn't know they were supposed to be enemies. Maul floated over in her mobile bubble, her tentacles waving in greeting. Are you talking about us again? We are not that special, you know. We just wanted to be friends. That's what makes it special, Sarah said. Wanting to be friends is the most natural thing in the universe. It's only when adults teach children to hate that it becomes complicated. You two reminded everyone that friendship is the default state. Hatred is what has to be taught. The three of them stood together, watching the reconstruction work continue around them. Vorthan and Kesari, once sworn enemies, building something new together. It was not perfect. There were still tensions, still conflicts, still some who clung to old hatreds, but the direction had changed. The momentum was toward peace, not war. A message came through to Sarah's communication device. The Galactic Council was requesting her assistance with another conflict, this one between two species who had been fighting for over a century. Could she come? Could she bring her approach, her methods, her understanding? She looked at Sari and Maul, at the workers building homes for refugees, at the planet slowly healing from decades of destruction. Then she looked up at the stars, where more suffering waited, more hatred, more cycles of violence that needed to be broken. Yes, she replied to the council, I'm on my way. Because that was what humans did now. They carried their hard-won wisdom to every corner of the galaxy, teaching that enemies could become friends, that understanding was more powerful than weapons, that peace was possible if enough people chose to believe in it. It was not an easy mission. It was not a quick fix. It required patience and courage and an endless capacity for hope in the face of despair. But it worked. Slowly, painfully, one conversation at a time, it worked. Sarah took one last look at the scene before her, the former battlefield transformed into a symbol of new beginnings. Then she headed to her ship, ready to do it all again. Because somewhere out there, beings were suffering, families were being torn apart, children were being taught to hate. And Sarah knew that she had something to offer them, something that no weapon or technology could match. Genuine understanding. It was not much. It was not dramatic. It would not make for exciting stories of conquest and glory. But it was the one thing that actually worked. The one thing that turned enemies into friends, wars into peace, hatred into something that might, with enough time and effort, transform into love. The humans had learned this through millennia of suffering. And now they shared that knowledge freely, asking nothing in return except the chance to help others avoid the same painful lessons. Perhaps that was the greatest gift any species could offer, not power or wealth or technology, just the wisdom to know that everyone suffers, everyone hopes, everyone wants to be understood, and the courage to act on that knowledge, even when hatred seemed easier. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars. They were the diplomats who turned wars into peace, the bridge builders who connected enemies, the quiet voices who reminded everyone that understanding was always possible if only someone was willing to try. And Sarah Chen, heading off to another conflict on another world, was determined to keep trying for as long as she lived. Because that was what humans did. They hoped, they connected, they understood. And in the end, that made all the difference.